I'm Chris Allwood, and I lead the team at CAF who come up with new services for charities and donors. And we've recently developed a new, much simpler way for charities to receive donations called CAF Donate. My background is in charities and social enterprises, particularly in startup trading and fundraising. Today's session is in two main parts. For the first part, we're going to look at trends in fundraising and giving, where and how charities get their income, and who's giving and how. The second bit, we're going to look at 5 practical things you can do to grow your fundraising income. So let's start by looking at the income that charities receive. So this is the voluntary income that charities get, and this is an overall average for the whole of the sector. And this comes from the 2013 NCBO Almanac. You can see that individuals are the most important source of voluntary income for charities. 45% of the income is coming from individuals. Then another big chunk is legacies. Statutory sources make up about 1/5 of all income. That is any kind of government funding, whether it be national, local or other parts of government. National Lottery makes up 3%. Trusts, that's trusts and foundations, about 14%. And companies, part of funding we hear quite a lot about, but actually a relatively small proportion at 6%. And this varies quite a lot depending on the size of charities. And so we're able to break this down from smaller charities to much larger ones. And you might well want to have a look at the sort of similar charities to you so you can see whether you are typical or different from the average for your size of charity. Let's start with the smallest charities, what we've called here the micro charities. These are charities with a turnover of less than £10,000. And for these charities, individual income is really, really important. It's 3/4 of all the income. The second largest source is trusts at 13%, and statutory sources make up almost all the rest with 9% of income. So about 1/4 comes from trusts and government in some form, the other 3/4 from individuals. As charities get a bit larger, these are the charities with incomes between £10,000 and £100,000. The proportion of income from individuals becomes slightly less, still just over half and very important, but the statutory and the trust income both become much more important, both now about 1/5 of all the income. Now, as charities get even larger, these are charities with a turnover between £100,000 and £1 million. You can see the proportion from individuals, again, still the largest, but it's shrinking, just under half now. And government income, particularly, that statutory income, is growing in importance now up to 1/4 of all the income. The other thing that's worth noting for these charities is the importance of lottery income. Now 6% of all their income comes from the lottery. Larger again are the charities with a turnover between £1 million and £10 million. And for these charities, lottery is still relatively important at 5%, and you'll see that legacy income is starting to grow and become significant for the first time, 9%. And trusts, also very important for these, 13% of their income from trusts and foundations. And then the largest charities, these are the charities with an income of a turnover rather of more than £10 million. They still very important individual income, but less than half, sort of 45% of the overall voluntary income. And they have very important income from legacies. So 17% of their income, that's that bottom slide, coming from legacies. And still quite a lot from statutory as well, 18% from statutory. Much less income for these charities from the lottery. I'm sure the smaller charities are feeling really sorry for them about that. So that's the income. Now let's have a little look at the actual spend that charities spend on fundraising to bring that income in. And that's a bit harder because the data on that is not included in the annual return to the Charity Commission. But there are a group of charities, 23, who take part in a study called Fund Ratios. And they submit much more detailed data about both how much they spend on fundraising and what they get in from it. And they submit that and share it with each other so that they can benchmark their fundraising spend. And they make the summary of that information publicly available, so we can have a look at how what they spend on the different types of fundraising and how that's changed over time. So this is what they're spending. So on individuals, they're spending 86% of their spend on fundraising. Legacies 5%, and companies and trusts, it's a combined figure, the way they record it, is at 9%. And you can see that it hasn't really changed very much over time. It's quite a long-term study, but over the 5 years of the study, it hasn't really shifted at all. So the vast majority of their fundraising spending is on individual fundraising. And they also submit data about their specific income. So you can see how that fundraising spending maps onto the income that those specific charities are getting. And so the income is the money on the right, that's the money coming in, and on the left, that's how much they're spending, that's the money going out. So you can see it was at 86% of income coming in, but, 86% of their spend, that's what they're spending on bringing that income in, but actually it's only bringing in 58% of their income. And so the money they're spending on legacies and on companies and trusts is proportionately bringing much more income in. So they're spending 5% on legacies and bringing in 16%, and spending 9% on companies and trusts and bringing in 26%. And we'll come back a bit later on to look at those differences, and so you can see how you might get the best bang for your buck, and what the pros and cons might be of investing in those other areas of fundraising beyond individual. So that's the breakdown and trends for income and spend on fundraising. Now let's have a look at the other end. Let's look at the donors and what's going on there. So the graph on the left is showing that in a typical month, just over half of people give to charity. And you can see that hasn't really changed very much over time. Sort of between 50 and 60% of people give to charity in any one month. And that average donation, if you look on the graph on the right, the range is about £4 to £8 for young adults, and about £10 to £15 for people once they're past about 45. And you can see that women are a bit more generous than men. So there are a huge number of people in the UK giving to charity, and that is something that people do throughout their lives, and there's a great opportunity there for charities to receive some of that and fund their work. And how do they do that? How do they make those donations? Well, this chart shows the different payment methods that people can use to make donations. And you'll see that cash is still the most popular way of making a donation, with 50% of all donations still being made by cash. Second is direct debit. You can see that about almost a third of direct donations are made by direct debit. And then the really important thing about direct debit is, this is a fairly obvious one, is that it doesn't just happen once, but it happens every month. And so it's that regular income that's so important. The numbers by each of the payment types are the average donation size. And so that although cash is the most popular donation, the average size is about £5, whereas direct debit, the average size is about £10. So it's not at all surprising that charities are so focused on trying to attract direct debits. And direct debits are actually becoming more popular. 5 years ago, there were 5% less donations by direct debit, so it's still increasing as a payment type. The surprising thing we particularly found when we were looking at creating CAF Donate was actually just how few charities can accept direct debits. This is a study by the Payments Council where they're looking to see how many different payment types can be accepted by charities. And you'll see that cheques, 82% of charities accept payments by cheque. But the really important, I think, message that we saw here is that only 9% of charities can currently receive direct debits. In other words, 91% of charities can't get a direct debit from a donor, and they tend to be small and medium-sized charities. So our mission as a charity is to grow giving, and this seems to be how donors want to give. So the inspiration and the vision for us for CAF Donate was a simple, risk-free way for charities to accept direct debits without having to pay a monthly or a setup charge. And later on in our series of webinars, we're going to do a webinar about how you transfer one-off donations into regular voluntary income. So either watch out for the live version of that or have a look in the library of webinars and have a look at that one if that's something you'd like to find out more about. I'd now like to look at a specific channel for asking or setting up donations, and that specific channel is mobile. There's so much talk about mobile both in the fundraising world and just in the world in general. It's such an sort of explosive growth, and it's becoming really important for fundraisers. And here's some key stats as to why it's becoming so important. I mean, the first one is just that mobile ownership is now pretty much ubiquitous. Pretty much everybody has a mobile phone, and now about half of those phones are smartphones. So 45% here, and that's growing all the time, sort of growing a lot every year. And importantly, more than half of those smartphones are on pay monthly contracts. And that's really important because as part of contracts, you usually get a data allowance as well. And so if you're on a contract, you're much more likely to be surfing the web on your mobile phone. And that's obviously particularly important for fundraisers if they're wanting people to make a donation over the web on their phone. The other really surprising and quick thing has been the growth of tablets. 2 years ago, nobody had a tablet. Today, 1/4 of people own a tablet. That's amazingly fast adoption, and it makes it really important that the stuff that we're doing works well on tablets. Having said all that, although mobile is important, and it is certainly growing very fast, as a proportion of donations, it's still relatively small. This is an interesting study done by YouGov in the US, which looks at actually how people are giving and what is inspiring people to make a gift. So I don't know if we can't quite zoom in on this one, but I hope you can read that. But the most important reason that people gave for why they had made a gift was giving to a charity they already regularly support. So that's quite unsurprising. We know that people tend to give to the same charities over and over. But I think what's a bit more surprising is that still in second place, direct mail is cited as the reason for making a donation in 21% of donations. So still really important way of inspiring people to give. Next is hearing about the cause in the media, And I think that's especially important for smaller charities where you might have a small or no marketing budget at all. That kind of stuff in local press or on local web channels is a really good way of getting the word out about your charity. And then finally, email, or in fourth place, not finally, an email campaign is growing as a way of people finding out and inspiring people to give. Another key trend is just the growth of campaigns overall. Often campaigns are used instead of going out directly under the charity's own brand. So I'm sure you haven't missed Movember. Everyone's seen the consequences of that, and other ones like World's Biggest Coffee Morning for Macmillan. But there are also much smaller local campaigns that have been very successful that people are running, and it's becoming an increasingly important part of the way that charities fundraise. And then the final trend that I think is useful to note and understand, and this one might not be quite such good news, is that it's all a bit more complicated than it used to be. It's unusual now for charities just to have one main way of fundraising. In the past, they maybe had a donation leaflet with a direct debit sign-up form, or they did child sponsorship, or whatever it might be, and that tended to be the main way a charity was funded. Increasingly now, charities have a portfolio of ways that donors can support them. And each of the things in that portfolio are matched to a particular donor type that the charity is trying to attract. So we're going to move into the sort of second part of the webinar now, and that is a chance to look at how you might create or develop some of those aspects of your portfolio of ways that donors can support your charity. So let's start with the first thing, and the first thing is the plan. And this is just about getting your ducks in a row, having a plan, and working out what it is that you want to be doing. And it doesn't need to be complicated. In fact, it's much better if it's not, and it's nice and simple. And also, you don't need to stick to it rigidly. It's better if you can adapt it with what you're learning as you go, because undoubtedly, as soon as you start sending stuff out or speaking to supporters, you'll learn all sorts of stuff. So let's look at the main elements for your plan. So these 5 sort of chunks are the things that you need to think about for any kind of fundraising plan. The starting point, and that's the where are you now? What's going on for you as a charity now? How much income are you getting? Who's giving it to you? And how are they giving it to you? And what are the trends in that? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Are there different groups of people who are giving less or more? So the sort of what's going on now. The second part is where do you want to be? Hopefully you have a mission and vision for your charity anyway, but how does that relate to your fundraising? And what are the objectives in your fundraising? I think in simple terms, the really important thing is to have some kind of big, exciting goal for your fundraising that everyone can pull towards and get excited about. It's really important that everyone knows what it is you're driving towards and why that's an exciting thing. And then the next bit is how you're going to get there. And sometimes these are called 4 W's and an H. The who, what, why, where, how. I think I've got them all there. Yeah, I think so. Not quite in the right order. But this is really the heart of your plan. So start off by thinking, well, why should donors support your cause? What is it about your cause that's compelling for them? Then, who are they? This is where it's really important to have done that early work on who your current donors are. What kind of people are they? How are they supporting you? Are there other groups you could be working with, other groups of donors you could be targeting who might particularly respond to the type of work you're trying to do? Then once you know who they are, you have to work out where you're going to find them, how you're going to be able to talk to them, whether that's through social media, through the media, maybe through emails, maybe through the web, maybe through going door to door and speaking to them on the doorstep. It depends on the group of people that you're trying to engage with. Next is the how. How are you going to come up with some kind of engaging appeal or campaign to speak to that group of donors? And finally, the what. Well, it is worth thinking about what could go wrong and what you might do to prevent that from happening. Don't spend too long on that, but it might save you a lot of time in the long run. And those 4 W's and the H, and again, it doesn't need to be big and complicated. That's probably just a one-pager. That is the heart of your fundraising plan. And once you've got that, then you can work out actually, well, what actions are you going to need to take to achieve that? How long is it going to take? When are you going to need to do it? Are you going to need money? Is it stuff you can do for free? Who is going to be involved in doing it? And then the final thing is, how will you know if it's worked? Going back to your goals, what do you want to have got to by when? What are the targets? How will you be sure that you're having the effect that you want to? It's well worth doing that groundwork and having that plan. The second tip is multi-channel where possible. And what that means, if you haven't come across this term channel, it's just the way in which either you're asking people to give or the way they're actually handing over their donation to you. Sometimes that's the same, sometimes they're different. So the channel might be the phone, it might be direct mail going through the post, it might be your website, whatever it is. And the channel of ask and the channel of response don't have to be the same. So lots of people respond to a direct mail ask by ringing a phone number and making a credit card donation over the phone. And it's important that when you run a campaign, even if the ask is just going out down 1 or 2 channels, make sure you think through how people might want to respond and you give them all the channels you can so that they can make the response in the way that they would find easiest and best. And so some of these channels might be Facebook. CAF has an app that you can add on Facebook. So straight away people can respond without leaving Facebook. And we've got another webinar in our series which looks at how exactly you set that up to be able to receive donations on your Facebook page. It's also really important to remember people just phoning up or filling in a form and posting it back to you. The vast majority of donations are still made in this way, so don't forget them. And this is the screen on Catanate where you can upload those donations so people can send you a form with their direct debit details or their credit card number, and you can upload them and accept those donations. And there's the detail of how you do that. Online, have a great way to accept donations from your website. And again, we've got another specific webinar which looks at how you can make that a really engaging and easy channel for donors to use. And finally, we spoke about mobile earlier. Make sure that if somebody looks at your donation pages on their mobile phone, make sure it's A, legible and easy to read, but also easy for them to make that donation with the smaller buttons or touching the screen on the mobile phone. So let's look a bit about how you particularly do that optimization of online. And here's just a little checklist you might want to use when you're doing this online. So here's one of the Captain8 customers, Porchlight, and I think they've done a great job of optimizing their online donations. So firstly, make sure you have a donate button on every page. And a good way of doing that is to put that in the navigation of your website. So they've put that on the right of the navigation. You can see donate now in yellow there. And they've put it in a different color so that it's really obvious. Because people often come to websites through search engines, they may well not come in through your home page. And if the only link to your donate now button is on your home page, it might be quite difficult for them to find the right page. Second thing is keep the donors inside your site. You don't really want them linking out to other websites because they might get distracted and not complete your donation, or they might go off and do something else. You really want to keep them there. So Porchlight have used the Captain8 widget here to embed inside their site. If you're doing that though, make sure you match the colors and fonts. It wants to look like it's an integral part of the site rather than something very different or separate. So it doesn't look messy but feels like part of the same experience. Show them what their donation buys. What do you get for £10 given to your charity? What difference is that going to make? The Porchlight have done that in a couple of ways here. They've used the Captain8 functionality to add that on the left by each of the suggested donation amounts, but they've also, in the panel on the right, they've laid out what lots of different amounts might be. And you'll know from your donors the kind of amounts they give, and so you'll be able to tailor those amounts to your specific donors. A simple thing is just make sure you offer regular giving. It's a great chance to get that sustainable income for your charity, and if you don't offer it, people certainly won't do it. And finally, make sure there's some kind of way of giving immediate thanks to people and a receipt for their donation. If they're doing it online, make sure it goes straight to their email. Again, Captain8 has that feature built in, so that can happen automatically. And as I just mentioned, we've got another webinar which actually walks you through step by step how you set up each of these features in Captain8. That webinar is called Make Your Website a Magnet for Donations. The next tip is about social giving and how you can harness the fun and power of social giving. And there's some great examples recently of how people have used social giving. I'm sure you've seen No Makeup Selfie. Recently, Cancer Research did a great job of, they didn't instigate it, but they got themselves to be able to react and respond to that opportunity and raised a huge amount of money for the charity as a result. But smaller charities have benefited from social giving too. This example, top left, I don't know if you can see that, that's called the Plumpy Nut Challenge that Merlin, the response relief charity, did. And they got some celebrities, but also lots and lots of individuals to get sponsored to live on these nutrition bars that they hand out in disasters, and people have got sponsored to live on those for 24 hours. And it was a great way of really getting people to understand the charity's work in a sort of real world way, but also getting the word out. And they were very successful in that and raised an awful lot of money. Top right, you can see Movember. I've mentioned that already, but that's been very successful. And Triathlon, Cancer Research's Giving Up Alcohol for January campaign. All have been based around social media and have used that really effectively. And small charities can really benefit from that too. Here's a small charity who ran a really creative campaign called Adopt a Word. And this is where anybody can choose to adopt a word in the English language for a year. So you choose a word, any word in the dictionary, and you adopt it. And you get sent a certificate of adoption, and you can share that with all your friends on Facebook and Twitter and say, look, now I am the sponsor of this word for the whole year. And They've made a lot of money, raised more than £100,000 with this website that was pretty cheap to set up, and they also have done very well, which they didn't really expect, because it's only for a year. There's a huge renewal rate, because people don't want to give up on their word after a year. They want to adopt it again because they've got that connection for it. I think you can even get a mug with your word on, which is a lovely thing to have. And then the final tip is about legacies. And we looked right at the beginning of the webinar at the income that you can potentially get from legacies as opposed to the cost of that fundraising, that type of fundraising. And legacies are going to become more and more important as the baby boomer generation retiring and also dying. And potentially these are very generous, they're a very generous cohort of supporters, and they are keen when asked to leave money in their wills to charities, but a really small proportion of people actually do. There's a great opportunity to do much more with legacies for charities. You can see this gives you an idea of the return on investment for £1 invested in different types of fundraising. So legacies are getting a £25 return for every £1 invested. So it's a very good way of fundraising. Of course, it's not an instant return. As a rule of thumb, it's reckoned that for any investment you make in legacies, you can expect on average about a 7-year return. So it's going to take you 7 years to get your money back. And it is difficult to know before that whether you've been successful. Sometimes people will tell you if they've left a legacy for you and put something in their will, but more often than not they won't. So it's not a simple or easy way of fundraising, but it is certainly rewarding if you can do it well. And there's a couple of, well, there's lots of different ways of doing it, but two I'd just like to speak about quickly, and they depend on how much you want to invest in this. So if you really want to invest in it, then a telephone campaign to your warmest supporters is a very good way to run a legacy campaign. So Freedom from Torture ran a phone call campaign, which they followed up with a letter to their warmest supporters, and they had an 8.13% pledge rate, so an amazingly high rate of people saying yes, they would put something in their will for the charity. And again, just do it with your warmest supporters, and you have to do it sensitively, obviously, because we're talking about wills, but it's a great thing to do. If you want to do something just a bit simpler, the sort of simplest thing you can do is just have a good page on your website about how to do it. So just explaining to your donors, well, if you want to do it, this is what you do. So it can talk about the different types of bequest that somebody could leave. And it's a really simple thing to do. It'll probably take you less than half an hour's work, but the return that you can get from that will be, can be very significant. So thank you very much for listening. That's the end of the webinar today. Here's the summary of the tips that we looked at. So get your ducks in a row, have a plan for your fundraising, multi-channel, both for the ask and for the way that donors can respond to that ask. Make sure you optimize online, try something social, and finally, look at doing a legacy proposition. Have a way of people leaving something to you in their will. If you do have any questions, then please do phone us on 03000 123 800, or send us an email at cafdonate, that's just one word, at cafonline.org. And we'd love to answer any questions that you have. And we also have a number of groups now on LinkedIn. So if you go to this LinkedIn page, then you can see all the groups that CAF have, and if you go to the specific one around charity fundraising, there'll be lots more tips and posts from other charities about stuff that they've learned about how to fundraise more effectively. Thank you very much, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.